This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
4 minutes after 10 is the time, and game on. Dr. Philip Lee, a minister in the Justice Department, has resigned on principle. The principle being that he, well, I mean, his own words, won't be able to look his children in the eye and honestly say that he did his best for them. He cannot, in all good conscience, support how our country's exit from the EU looks set to be delivered. I love mornings like this, I'm not going to lie to you. I don't know how the next 3 hours are going to unfold. I don't know whether there is the prospect of more resignations happening while we are live on air. Donald Trump is still talking in Singapore. We'll dip in, perhaps, to find out what it is he's talking about. And there are other stories in the news that I was minded to draw your attention to. The one that I suspect is most important is the number of councils warning that their social care provision, their residential home and domiciliary care, is close to collapse. 3/4 of local authorities, something we've been watching very closely on this programme for a very long time. I think you'll allow me to say that we've also been watching very closely the inevitable fracturing of the government as Brexit becomes reality. I'm going to try, I think I am today going to try to talk about it calmly today. I think I'm going to try not to get angry with the unicornists and the people who could be in any way surprised by what has happened and what is happening later today. It's only one ministerial resignation, but it changes the arithmetic of some very important votes coming up later today. But very briefly, I said to you, in the days immediately after the referendum, when I was only really beginning to understand the full ramifications of what that vote could potentially mean, I said to you that a day would dawn where elected members of our sovereign parliament would have to decide whether or not they were going to do their democratic duty or whether or not they were going to follow the editorial lead of the Daily Mail, or, if you prefer that meaningless, utterly fatuous phrase, the will of the people. And the reason that I thought that was not because I understood things particularly well. It was because I did an A-level. Kidderminster accent came out then. I don't know why. Because I did an A-level. I did an A-level in politics, and one of the things I remembered was the distinction between a delegate and a representative. So trade unions have delegates at the TUC. That when they turn up to vote, they know how they're going to vote. Theoretically, despite the whipping tradition, theoretically, elected parliamentarians in this country are representatives. We have a representative democracy, which means you elect an MP because you think he or she is equipped with the faculties necessary to vote in your best interests. And we believed, and still do, that the crunch would come when MPs had to look at what the government presented with regard to Brexit and decide whether or not they believed it would be in the best interests of their constituents. So where it breaks down now is, on one side, you've got people like Jacob Rees-Mogg, who demonstrated on this radio station yesterday that his understanding of issues like that the port at Dover is akin to that of a cauliflower. And on the other side, you have MPs like Dr. Philip Lee, who is a loyalist and an old friend of Theresa May. He attended her wedding, I believe. And he now has been waiting to see what they would come up with that would possibly allow him to vote to carry on with Brexit, despite not thinking it was necessarily the best thing that could happen to the country. He has decided that he can't do that because what the government appears poised to deliver is, according to his judgment as an elected parliamentary representative of his constituents, it's something that he can't support. He believes he has a responsibility to his constituency of Bracknell. He talks of consultations with local employers, and to my mind, and I'm not a political journalist, this seems profoundly significant, both in terms of impact and in terms of timing. But let's check with an expert. Theo Usherwood is LBC's political editor, and he joins me in the studio, quite possibly not for the last time today, as the tectonic plates of the voting begin to shift beneath our feet. So begin by telling us, Theo, how important you think this is.
This is very, very significant because it goes beyond any accusation of grandstanding that Philip Lee is trying to draw attention on himself. There is a vote this afternoon at around 4 o'clock to give MPs a meaningful vote, in effect, to send Theresa May and David Davis back to Brussels if they don't like the final deal that they've secured. And this adds to their number, because that's where the Tory rebellion is looking to be coming from this afternoon. Labour will support that amendment. There had been questions about an amendment from Dominic Grieve. That's been rejected by the government. So that's the showdown, and Philip Lee's resignation now adds to that number, because if he'd supported them, he would have had to resign inevitably as a member of the government. He is an ultra-loyalist of the Prime Minister.
That's true,
that's
is it?
Key. He hasn't voted against the Conservative manifesto since he became an MP back in 2010.
And he is an old friend of Theresa May.
Old friend of the Prime Minister. He went to her wedding, well trusted, and he says in his summation, in his statement just released in his website, if in my medical experience, because of course he is a GP, if a course of treatment is not working, then I review it. I also have a duty to get my patients informed consent for that action. If Brexit is worth doing, then it is certainly worth doing, well, regardless of how long that takes. It is, however, irresponsible to proceed as we are. That's Philip Lee there. So, in effect, with that statement, he is confirming the way in which he'll vote this afternoon, supporting the likes of Nicky Morgan, Anna Soubry, Ken Clarke. And that makes this rebellion all the more likely to be successful.
And will he bring people with him, do you think? Will this embolden some people who possibly were perched on the fence?
Absolutely. Of course, you know how Parliament works. There are caucuses. And if they see somebody like Philip Lee, who's brave enough to stand up and say, actually...
Is it brave? Because I mean, if May survives, his ministerial career is over.
This could be the one that he could take.
Yes.
Inevitably, he could take the blame for bringing down the government if events were to proceed in a certain way. Now, that's a big if. But this is the first resignation, and if others follow, if other junior ministers look at this and they say, well, if Philip Lee did it, then he provides me with the cover for me to do it, then it will have been even more significant.
You'll join us later to talk us through those votes in a little more detail, and I think there's something else I wanted to talk to you about as well, wasn't there?
Yes, a certain select committee appearance, a grilling,
Aaron
a
Banks
really
is
tough interview.
in front of the select committee. Another really tough interview for Aaron Banks. Crikey, he's making a habit of it. Thank you very much, Theo Ashwood. 11 minutes after 10 is the time. My phone lines are open. Here we go. You know that it had to come to this. You know that the what's the word I want? The momentum of Brexit is increasingly being revealed to be hot air and hope. I'm choosing my words quite diplomatically. I don't know whether I'm going to be able to get through the entire hour being diplomatic, but if I describe it as hot air and hope, that's not offensive. Hope is not a bad thing. Hot air is an unkind but accurate description of where we are now. You know, the phrases like "will of the people." We know that the phrases that have fallen apart now, like "they need us more than we need them," or "we have to walk away." All of this is increasingly exposed as hot air. Some of that hot air has been exhaled by decent people. I think it's very important to stress this repeatedly, despite the fact that some people are determined to pretend that these words don't come out of the mouths of people like mine. Many people voted to leave the European Union in good faith. They didn't do it because they were racist or xenophobic or ignorant or stupid. But the point about today is that 2 years have now passed, give or take. And during those 2 years, no case has been made to persuade the people of this country that what we are doing is anything like what the people who voted to leave the European Union were expecting. You have a small rump, a gammony rump, of people who will now pretend that they knew all along that crashing out on WTO terms was the ultimate end game, and it was what they desired, despite the fact that I don't believe a single person said that, actually, in the referendum. I don't think did anyone on the Leave side say the best case scenario, the best thing that could possibly happen is that we crash out without any trade deal at all with the European Union and start trading on WTO terms that I don't understand at all? We'll check the archives. I don't think anybody said that, but plenty of people now will be pretending that they did, because the alternative is to admit that you made a terrible but forgivable mistake. What Philip Lee identifies today is the fact that the government has not set out an achievable, clearly defined path. So he has to decide whether or not he votes to close his eyes and walk towards an unknown destination, or whether or not he votes potentially to retain the status quo. Here, in a nutshell, is the point that anybody arguing, and some quite senior people have done this. I saw a former ambassador to Washington, Sir Christopher Mayer, did it at the weekend. Anybody still arguing that threatening to walk away as a negotiating tactic is missing an incredibly crucial point. And that point is that when you threaten to walk away from any other type of negotiation, you revert to and retain the status quo. So to be really simplistic about it, if you and I were negotiating to buy a house, walking away from that negotiation would involve staying in our current home. Do you see? If you and I were negotiating to buy a car, a new car, walking away from that negotiation would involve keeping our current car. What the European Union exit negotiations involve, if anybody moots the notion of walking away without a deal, that would involve burning down your own house and then entering into negotiations to buy a new one and then threatening to walk away and make yourself homeless. It would involve driving your current car to the dealership, watching it get pulped in the scrapping machine, and then starting negotiations to buy a new car. At the point of which you pull out of those negotiations, you're left with absolutely no idea of how you're ever going to get home. So I understand why intelligent people have made this mistake, but it's very, very important to give them the room and the understanding that they need to acknowledge the mistake. Negotiations where you threaten to withdraw only work when what you withdraw to is clear and defined. And 99 times out of 100, it will be clearly defined as the status quo, i.e. membership of the European Union. So you threaten to walk away and keep what you've got. If you're threatening to walk away without any understanding or knowledge at all of what you're going to get, you are, well, either, shall we say, pathologically optimistic or bonkers. That's your choice. And if you're pathologically optimistic, I want what you're on. Seriously. And that, I think, is where Philip Lee has led us this morning. And oddly, because we haven't mentioned it recently, the inevitability of this moment coming around, which we identified here together 2 years ago. Eventually, our parliamentary democracy will demand that men and women like Philip Lee, who are persuaded beyond doubt that the government hasn't got a Scooby-Doo what it's doing and that what it is currently intending to do would be disastrous, he has to decide whether he votes according to his conscience or whether he votes according to short-term careerism. And that's why I applaud him this morning. Although I obviously would, because I've believed now for the best part of 2 years that we are embarked upon a path of unprecedented idiocy. I'm going to open up the phone lines. I haven't really asked you a question, but I think I would like to, if I could, frame it in the context of this resignation and just ask, what do you think of Philip Lee? We'll talk about some of the broader Brexit stuff as well, but the bottom line is he has decided, quite rightly, according to our parliamentary tradition, according to our sovereignty, actually, it's another word that a lot of people have misused and misunderstood. He has decided that his job, his role, his democratic duty is to vote according to his conscience and his understanding of the issues. Give me a call and tell me how anyone can have a problem with that. Because if you've got a problem with that, you genuinely do have a problem with the sovereignty of our parliament. You genuinely do have a problem with the nature of British democracy, British parliamentary democracy. If you've got a problem with what Philip Lee has done, you genuinely do think that democracy is less important somehow, that parliamentary sovereignty is less important somehow than continuing with the psychodrama of a few billionaires, pantomime toffs and snake oil salesman spivs. It's 10:18.
This is LBC. James O'Brien on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
21 minutes after 10 is the time. These are the mornings that I arguably enjoy the very most, where we can just chew the fat together about remarkable political developments. I suspect, like me, you may be dreaming of the days where remarkable political developments didn't come along like buses. You want to go back, in some sense, to the the sort of more boring era of British politics that preceded, I suppose you'd say, preceded the coalition government, or at least the financial crisis in 2008. God, 10 years ago. But today you have a ministerial resignation. You have a vote on the House of Lords amendment to the EU withdrawal bill that Dr. Philip Lee, a Justice Minister, has announced he will support. If it is adopted, he believes it will empower Parliament to reject a bad deal and to send the government back to square one. I think it's an act of uncommon principle, and I think if you're on the other side of the EU debate from me, hello, nice of you to listen. But if you are on the other side of the EU debate, what this does to you is take away any hope you had that there is some sort of secret plan. Because if a wedding guest and close ally and historical loyalist of Theresa May feels the need to resign a ministerial position because there isn't any plan at all, or at least anything that remotely resembles a plan of positivity, if he has reached that conclusion, then any hope you have that there's a brilliant wizard wheeze tucked away somewhere in David Davis's back pocket or Theresa May's handbag, those hopes ended just before 10 o'clock this morning. 0345 6060973. No particular questions. Give us a call. And let's chat together, try and make sense of these remarkable times in which we're living and this remarkable ambition to continue upon a path of utterly unnecessary national self-harm. Alexander is in Plymouth. Alexander, what would you like to say?
Good morning. I think I quite agree with him, actually. I have lived in his constituency at one point. Never met the guy, but
we have to acknowledge, don't we, that this is one of those resignations that brings to the forefront a politician of whom most of us have probably never heard before. But not in your case.
Oh no, it was a while ago. But yeah, I think it's quite difficult to know that the UK's parliamentary democracy is representative, as you've said. You said we've had a representative democracy, and I think that it's a bit squiffy in that sense.
Yes, well, it is, and the referendum, in a way, this was David Cameron's toxic legacy. The referendum ignored that, in a sense, and that's why some of the most fraudulent demagogues and cheerleaders have jumped on this phrase "will of the people" and tried to use it as a gag.
Harkening back to 2015, we're all harkening back to 2015 as like a simpler time now.
Yes,
it's very strange, but I think that. Because I was listening to Andrew Adonis on a podcast the other day.
Yes, he has a rather good new book out.
Yeah, he was talking about how the UK has the best democracy, and I was thinking there just like, but like the Liberal Democrats at the last election, they got 1.2% of the seats for 8% of the vote. Like, what's that about?
But it's translating. I think people have been sitting and waiting. Apart from the fully kind of, could you describe them? The absolute fundamentalists, the Brexit fundamentalists, who are acting on faith and hope and have given up even pretending that they have facts and evidence on their side, and that's fine. But apart from them, there must have just been that belief that they must know what they're doing. There must be something they're going to pull out of their hat. There must be something that they're going to reveal, and this resignation...
It seems like that.
Yeah.
It very much seems like that, because they've been saying the same thing for like 2-3 years now, that it's all going to be okay, it's going to be absolutely fine. Something will come up, though, the EU will somehow capitulate, and I think the best thing I've heard is the explanation that they're not negotiating with another state. That's what they appear to think, that they're negotiating with another nation state, and they're not.
No, they're negotiating with a bloc of 27 individual nations, all of whose interests have to be served, and all of whose membership of that union has to be rendered superior and preferable to departing. But this has been true for 2 years. It's astonishing that people still don't understand this. Alexander, thank you. A couple of phone lines free. 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. The statement, I suspect, took a lot of work. It's rather well written, but it's incredibly detailed. He speaks of his work at the Justice Ministry, but he also makes clear that he believes the nation now needs to recognise that the UK and EU are not ready for Brexit, and pause, extend or revoke Article 50 so that we do not leave before we are ready. And that, in a way, leads us to this curious question. Why would anyone want to leave before we are ready? Dr. Philip Lee hasn't necessarily floated the notion of remaining being inevitable. He's just said, look, we're not ready. So you now break the country down into three categories. People who think we should remain, people who think we should leave if and when we're ready, and people who think we should leave even though we're clearly not ready. Those are the three constituencies now. That's the will of the people that somehow has to be reflected. They're the three legs of the stool. People who think we should remain. You could break them down according to people who think we should remain and leave everything as it is, or people like me who think we should remain and start actually taking our role in Brussels seriously and sending MEPs there who are worthy of the name and the salary and the representation of our country, instead of sending shifty little liars. But there you go. That's just me. So you break down according to people who want to remain, people who want to leave still, if and when we're ready, and then people who want to leave even though we're clearly not ready. Which one are you? George is in Blackburn. George, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. I'm a first-time caller.
Welcome, George.
I'm one of these Brexit fundamentalists who your other callers are talking about.
So you want to leave even though we're definitely not ready?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean,
okay. Why is that then?
Because the thing is, we'll never be ready. Negotiations with the EU. The EU never agree to anything that we negotiate with. It's like
they haven't changed their position in 23 months.
No, when Cameron went over originally to negotiate, when he was in power, and he went over and he did big press conference saying he's going to get this and he's going to get that and he's going to get to that. He came back with nothing
He didn't.
to the electorate. No, he did in relation.
What did he say he was going to get?
Well, he said he was going to sort out things to do with migration and things to do with...
he didn't, though, did he? Because we were already subject to Article 2 of the Citizens' Charter. We could already...
I know, but he tried to negotiate things with them. And
with countries that are already in Schengen and the Euro. So David Cameron, and I think we can both agree the man's a clown. Some of us realised it at the time. Some of us, perhaps like you, didn't. You thought that he would be able to pull some sort of rabbit out of the hat. What happened when he went to those negotiations is the countries turned around and said to him, you're not in the Euro and you're not in Schengen. What is this mythical deal you think you can get that would make you even less involved in the European Union while still being in the European Union and having a very, very powerful role in framing its legislation? So park that for a minute, and you're perfectly welcome to ignore the fact that the European Union's negotiating position has been laid out in black and white for the best part of 2 years and hasn't changed 1 inch. You're perfectly entitled to pretend that's not true. Tell me why you're so keen to jump off this cliff without knowing where you're going to land.
Because this is the whole reason I voted Brexit in the first place. I mean, there's obviously this whole argument, or some people voted because they thought 350 million for the NHS, or...
No, you're much cleverer than that, clearly. You never believed any of that stuff. What was your reason?
No, it was none of that. For me, I saw the EU as and I still see, even 2 years later, I've not changed my opinion on why I voted, because you look at Italy. You've got Italy, Spain, Greece, Hungary, Poland. You've got so many cracks across the EU.
No, George, again, mate. Can you tell me why they've all got higher approval ratings for staying in the European Union than they had when we voted to leave?
I don't believe that. I mean, Italy's just voted in a very anti-EU party over there.
Both sides of it. The Lega. No, George, mate, you need to perhaps extend your reading a little further. Both sides of that coalition, the Lega and the Five Star Movement, yesterday announced they have absolutely no intention of leaving the Eurozone, let alone the European Union. So I'd ask you again, because I know a lot of people...
Not as yet.
A lot of people sell this line. No, not ever. A lot of people sell this line. Look at Italy, look at Portugal, look at Spain. It's become the new, they need us more than we need them, or it's become the new, get back control of our borders. But you know what happens when you pull those threads. They fall apart like a cheap suit. So you need to tell me why support for the European Union in all of the southern European countries that you've just mentioned has gone up exponentially since we voted to leave, and they've had a look at what leaving looks like. Why do you think that is, George?
Probably because they see the bullying tactics that he's been using against...
But the European Union's negotiating position has been laid out in black and white and hasn't shifted at all for 23 months. How is that bullying?
No, I'm just saying that the way Barnier and the way Tusk and Juncker have been acting towards towards our negotiators.
They've been representing the interests of member states, which we could still be if you want. But again, I mean, it's another word that I understand why you use it, and I could spend 10 minutes listing all the people who've poured this nonsense into your ear. But they laid out their negotiating position pretty much immediately after the result. It's been readable and published for all of that period of time. You can't say that they're bullying. Bullying would involve shifting and moving and changing. They know what they need. You cannot have membership of the single market without the acceptance of the four freedoms. So we're back to these two questions. Your main reason for voting to leave the EU, according to you, because you were too clever to fall for the lies about the NHS and all of that nonsense. I know. Yeah. So your main reason is, look what's happened in Greece and Italy, Spain and Portugal. And my question then becomes, why do you think all of those countries still have very high support for European Union membership, and it's gone up since we voted to leave? You need to give me a proper answer, George, before we crack on.
I'm trying.
Go on then. Well, try harder, my friend.
Right. Let's look at a country like another sort of United States, as it were. Like you've got European Union with all these member states and everything like that. Let's look at the United States as an example. Right, in the States, you've got 52 states, all of a very similar wage.
George, I'm 3 minutes late for the news. I don't really understand why you're describing America to me.
What I'm trying to say, the European Union doesn't work. You've got too many.
Okay, then why does everybody else want to stay in it?
Everybody else doesn't want to stay in it.
All right, George, and that's where we part, because now you're fantasising and I'm sharing facts with you. And that's great. Let's shake hands, move on, and I hope your unicorn arrives soon. It's 10:33. Thomas Watts is here now with the headlines.
Leading Britain's conversation, LBC, with James O'Brien.
10:37 is the time. It's by way of light relief. These are the sort of texts I have to field on days like today. I listened to your show as I enjoy you struggling to understand Brexit. Did you actually read the book I sent you about the EU monster? The EU is the Fourth Reich. It's from Mark, bless him, in Bournemouth. Graham in Exmouth. And George sounded like a lovely bloke. So I'm keeping my promise at this point in time to try to be polite to people who are clearly decent. Where's that one gone? Here it is. And this as well is the kind of stuff that you are now in bed with if you want to continue owning the decision to leave. Stay in the EU, James, and watch conscription come back for your young ones, guaranteed, and then I will laugh my head off. They will be deployed as per German instructions with no choice to police the EU and at their whim, says Graham in Exmouth, who presumably is allowed to drive. John's in Whetstone. John, what would you like to say?
Yeah, good morning, James. How are you doing?
I'm all right, John. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I'd just like to congratulate the Minister, Philip Lee, for actually listening to his conscience. I'm in Chipping Barnet.
Oh, Lord, Theresa Villiers.
Theresa Villiers. I wish she'd listened to her people who voted her in, who voted for Remain. But
this works both ways, doesn't it, in terms of conscience versus constituents. Theresa Villiers, I beg your pardon, would reach for the will of the nation rather than the will of the people within her constituency. And I think probably it's partly the fault of people like me. Somehow we've allowed that myth to run around the world that this incredibly tight result delivered a really, really powerful mandate. It delivered the opposite of a strong mandate. It delivered room for compromise, negotiation, and concord. But we don't have any of that. Do you not think that you and I would be the other way round if we would describe? How dare someone go against the expressed wishes of their constituents? I mean, you can see the logic and the validity in that position, even if you hate it.
But I understand that, but how can she go on about it's the will of the people that Brexit has come from? It depends.
Yeah. Well, then you speak to people like George, and you realise that the will of the people is built largely upon misunderstanding and falsehood.
Yeah. I just think, with Philip Lee, you kind of wish more politicians were like that. And people actually listening to your conversation with that gentleman before, there's no actual concrete argument rather than hearsay and conjuncture about things that could happen. And I've just heard you say something about conscription.
Yeah,
Where
that's
is that
Graham in
really-
Exmouth. But these are the arguments this is all you're left with once the facts have emerged. Once the Port of Dover have explained what's going to happen to the Port of Dover, then Jacob Rees-Mogg's claims that he somehow knows better, they're not going to resonate with many people. So, and once you know that they don't need us more than we need them, quite the opposite. In fact, Land Rover has just announced that it's moving production of one of its main vehicles to Slovakia. You know that the Fruit Pickers Association has announced that stuff's now rotting in fields and hiring is down on an unprecedented scale. You can turn around and say good, and people will, and that's fine, and I love them dearly, and I'll light a candle for them in church on Sunday. You say good, I'm glad that the fruit is rock. Yeah, because we've got our country back, and fish and passports. Yeah, you can do all of that, but eventually you are going to have to be like Graham in Exmouth, and you're going to have to start sitting in the corner of the room with two pencils up your nose talking about conscription.
But just a quick note on the passport and say it's unique being blue. I don't think it is. I think there's quite a few countries that blue passports.
Doesn't matter, mate. Doesn't matter. We're post-truth. And also, who cares? Honestly.
Exactly.
Who the hell cares what colour their passport is? All I care about... It's a bit like people. It's a bit like racists, isn't it? I care more about the colour of your skin than I do about what is in your heart and soul. And the passport, I care more about the colour of the passport than I do about how quickly it gets me through customs checks in the largest single market in the world.
How'd you get in and out? It's just...
What's your passport for? Aesthetic pleasure and colour-based joy. No, it's not. It's for negotiating your passage through borders right around the planet. And we've now voted to have a weaker one than we had before.
No, it's just...
Happy Christmas, John.
Yeah, see you later. Thank you.
Another John's in Cambridge. John, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I was just calling just about... ironically, when people are talking about the will of the people, it's funny how the will of the people doesn't extend to Northern Ireland when it comes to things like the Good Friday Agreement. And I speak of this on a more personal note because my parents have recently moved back to Northern Ireland.
Oh, yeah.
And for them, what they noticed was, because they moved back there last year,
Gosh.
this specific... divisions are gradually setting up, and they're from a Catholic background, if you want to call it that.
Yes.
And
so Republican.
Yes. Well, they would say sort of nationalist because they've never really sort of gone with the Sinn Féin sort of thing. They're more SDLP, I would say. And they've just sort of found the whole thing quite not only bizarre but also a tiny bit scary, because when things like marching season and stuff happen, that sort of essence of will of the people comes very strongly out in such a huge way. And when you hear people like Jacob Rees-Mogg and certain ministers brushing things like the border aside, it's incredibly heartening when you get people like Mr. Dr. Lee, taking a stand like that, even as he is a supporter of Theresa May. It's almost heartening to see that for people.
Well, not almost. It's profoundly heartening. And his medical...
Yeah.
I mean, I love this line here that Theo pointed out. In my medical experience... Because I don't know about you, John, but I thought until this happened, until Brexit and Trump came along, I thought I lived in a world where there was at least a deep foundation of rational objectivity, things that everyone would, even if you wanted to bite chunks out of each other over detail and policy and how best to deliver certain things, we'd all agree eventually about baseline principles. And this is a brilliant one. In my medical experience, if a course of treatment is not working, then I review it. I also have a duty to get my patients informed consent for that action. And now we realise that the Jacob Rees-Mogg wing of the Conservative Party and the Brexit movement doesn't care what the doctors say. He's just going to use your parents' faith and mine, he's just going to keep washing the wound in holy water.
Yeah, and I think, but you see, what's more frustrating is that not the whole will of the. I mean, this whole will of the people talk is starting to become very frustrating because, again, even those people who did vote to leave aren't getting what they want, aren't getting what they intended in the first place. But it's just the I mean, especially with Northern Ireland, it really makes me feel that
they don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're doing. And the stakes are higher in Northern Ireland, aren't they? That's the point you're making.
They are so high. And I remember as a child when I used to, because I lived there for some time as well, I have vivid memories of border checks, and I remember soldiers, going through. And I'm not saying it will go back to that,
of course.
But what I'm saying is that the tensions, because as much as people think Northern Ireland is back to normal, you have to go there to really understand how it is still incredibly tense. And something like this, of Arlene Foster taking the stand of, just the complete impudence of how she's conducting herself,
Well, this is why I think the Philip Lee thing is so interesting. If we were to be completely objective about it, that there was always that, I joke about them being unicorns, or the Mr. Micawber refrain about something will come up, or someone really clever is going to come along, particularly in the context of the Northern Irish border. The Brexit hardcore has been reduced to saying that there is a solution, we just don't know what it is yet. Again, something that I think a few years ago would have had us all chuckling wryly at, but now that is a political position, it's a principle apparently. There is definitely a solution, we just don't know what it is yet. In the context of Northern Ireland, that's terrifying for the reasons John highlights, but actually now we know, because Philip Lee is very loyal to Theresa May and has never ever voted against anything, I don't believe, that the party line demanded, we know there is no plan. That's the point now at which you either find yourself in favour of setting off on a journey you know not where with your eyes shut, or you stay at home. Staying at home obviously involves revoking Article 50. 10:46. I've got a couple of phone lines free. 0345 6060 973. Don't be shy. You really don't do yourself any favours if you listen to people like George express their confusion and reveal how misled they've been and think that somehow you'd do better while you sit there tapping away on your laptop. That really is ugly, because you're on the same team, you see. So what you're doing now is, oddly, fouling the people on your own team, because my team keeps scoring all the goals.
James O'Brien on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
It is 10:50 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we're just wondering what we want from our MPs. Do we want a sovereign parliament with elected representative democracy, which Dr. Philip Lee has very bravely endorsed today, going against the vote in his own constituency, where it was, I think, pretty much reflected the national vote. And actually, I think it may have been a bit higher, at 54 to 46 or thereabouts. But he has waited and waited and waited for evidence that his old friend and ally, Theresa May, knows what she's doing, and this morning he's concluded that she doesn't, so he cannot, in all conscience, go along with it. And we're just wondering what you make of that. How can anyone really have a problem with it? Unless it is fingers in ears, blindfold on, will of the people, unicornism. I don't know. And, of course, while we've been on air, Donald Trump has finally stopped speaking about this historic agreement with Kim Jong-un, which has seen Kim Jong-un agree with himself over what he said last September about aiming for denuclearization. It doesn't matter, of course, because Donald Trump doesn't do detail. All he wants is a photo opportunity and an opportunity to heap praise upon a man who killed his own uncle with a flamethrower. John Sweeney is one of the most informed observers of North Korean issues, the author of North Korea Undercover, Inside the World's Most Secret State. He's also the Newsnight journalist who's made a succession of films about the country, most recently The Kim Dynasty. He joins me on the line now. I was a little disingenuous, John, there, but because this is significant, but not necessarily for the reasons that many Trump admirers think.
Yes. So if you're being optimistic and positive, it's great that the leader of the free world, Donald Trump, has met with Kim Jong-un. And if you're being optimistic, you would go on to say that this is exciting and down the track, Kim Jong-un is serious about denuclearization. However, if you talk to North Koreans who've left North Korea, there was a lady, Ji Hyun Park, who was on our Newsnight last night, and she thinks this is rubbish. She thinks that Trump's being conned, and that Kim Jong-un will never give up his nuclear weapons because it is the best possible way of securing the Kim dynasty.
And also the Gaddafi precedent comes into play a bit there as well.
Yes, so the Gaddafi precedent was that Gaddafi gave up his weapons of mass destruction, and then sort of Tony Blair sort of gave him a nice hug, and the MI6 sent back some of the Libyan dissidents who Gaddafi then tortured, and everything was nice as pie until such time as there was a genuine revolution against Gaddafi, and then the West let his people kill him. Fair enough, he was a horrible dictator. But if anybody's smart in North Korea, and Kim Jong-un is smart, he's a tyrant, but he's no fool, they will observe what happened in Libya and say the solution is not to surrender the weapons of mass destruction. So what we're looking at is a piece, people argue, of showbiz. We're looking at something which is political theatre, no real substance, and that's bad because basically for Kim Jong-un to stand on the same platform as an equal with the President of the United States, you would want him to make some serious concession, something that he's giving the Americans, the democracies, in return for the honour of being treated as an equal. What is that? No one can say.
Would you mind briefly, John Sweeney, reminding us what North Korea is like? Because I don't know whether it's just from where I'm sitting, but a lot of us seem to have lost sight of that. People asking for selfies with Kim Jong-un. I alluded a moment ago to the assassination of his own uncle with a flamethrower. But for ordinary North Korean people, what is their daily existence actually like?
Miserable, mean and poor. North Korea was a Stalinist dictatorship. It's now been turned into a political religion which reveres the Kim dynasty as gods. Kim Jong-un rules brutally. There's a gulag, we suspect, of around 100,000 people. The first Westerner to tell the story of that was a guy, a Venezuelan communist, who was up in 1967 to 1974. Eventually he got out and he wrote a report for Amnesty International, and he wrote a poem called Pieta, in which he says, I suffer moons of pus. A crisis of pus. It's awful. So this guy describes a horrible nightmare inside the gulag, and this thing still exists to this day. So there is nothing that there is nothing in our experience as Westerners that can properly give you a flavour of what it's like, other than if you read Solzhenitsyn's work on the Soviet Gulag. It's that kind of place, but worse. So the idea that people are doing selfies with Kim Jong-un, that's disgusting.
John Sweeney, many thanks, as always, for your informed and first-hand accounts of these matters. Of course, plenty of uninformed people who wouldn't be able to find North Korea on a map will be cheering this to the rafters because Donald Trump has told them to. And there you find the common ground between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump would probably love to rule a country in the way that Kim Jong-un does. 99% of the population effectively enslaved or imprisoned, and 1% living it up like nobody's business. He could sell tickets, couldn't he? He could sell membership to that 1% club. What's that? He already does. 10:57 is the time. Back to Brexit and Philip Lee, the decision to... Well, that line about looking his children in the eye is pretty powerful, don't you think? I mean, whether you agree with him or not, it is the sort of principle that we're always demanding our politicians show, and they so rarely do. If, he writes today, in the future, I am to look my children in the eye and honestly say that I did my best for them, I cannot, in all good conscience, support how our country's exit from the EU looks set to be delivered. And that's remarkable. A lot of people ask me why I carry on doing this, especially in the face of so much vile abuse. And the answer is I care more about your children than you do. It's pretty simple. It's like Jamie Oliver with his food. Yet you have been persuaded, and I don't hold you culpable for this because the effort that's gone into it is immense. You've been persuaded to endanger your children's future, to compromise it, to make their future worse than our present. Doesn't mean our present is perfect. And so I have to keep fighting for your children, just like Philip Lee today fights for his children, my children, and yours, even if you're one of the people lining up to abuse him. That's why he's doing it. He might turn out to be wrong, but my God, that level of principle is rather lacking, isn't it, from the public stage? Rob's in Hayes. Rob, what would you like to say?
Hi James, how you doing? I hope you're fine.
All good, Rob.
Just a quick thing about ideology, James.
Yes.
That's why nothing makes any sense. So once you unravel facts and intelligence and take the ideology out of it, the ideology is left on one side, which is where we are now.
Put the ideology in a nutshell, will you? Is it because you're talking about a sort of form of exceptionalism, English exceptionalism, or a belief that we are?
No, just Tory party ideology in itself.
But Philip Lee's a Tory. Lots of Remainers are Tories.
Correct, yeah. And what you've got with Philip Lee is that he's actually put the ideology to one side and got intelligence on the other and thought, well, this is nonsense.
Yeah.
So where you've still got these Tories coming out with the normal lines, that's because if you look at the EU's a left-leaning organisation. Tory party are extreme right now, and I will say extreme right.
Yes.
Because Thatcher would never have associated herself with the National Front, but this Tory party is happy to take UKIP voters.
Yeah, and DUP.
So and that's where we are. That's really where we are. And I know that you touched on...
We can't talk about the party that generically, I don't think. Far be it from me to defend either major party in this country at the moment, but they're both so fractured and so divided that to speak of them as you do in a homogenous way. Anna Soubry is a Conservative, Ken Clarke is a Conservative, Dominic Grieve is a Conservative. There are members of the Cabinet who are utterly rationalist. They just haven't yet found the cojones that Philip Lee has found this morning, arguably because they've got more to lose.
That's right, yeah. And what you've got with those guys is that they themselves, even though they've come out and said, well, what's going on, they've been singled out by people in their own party as being as being people who just shut up and toe the party line and
crush the saboteurs.
That's correct, and that's where we are, and it's dangerous. We're in dangerous times because it's becoming acceptable. This is.
Yeah, it has. I mean, to put your fingers in your ears, close your eyes, and just wait for your unicorn, and that's fine. But unfortunately, it involves also damaging everybody else's existence. 11 o'clock is the time. I'll take a few more calls on this. If you want to grab the phone line that Rob is just vacating, the number you need remains 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on your phone, and here.
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.